Hey, good Thursday evening, everybody. Chief Meteorologist Brad Panovich here. Welcome into our live weather impact here. We're talking about a lot of storms today. That's going to be a big topic of our show tonight. We've got a lot of storms popping up across the area. The sea breeze making it for our flash flood warnings. We're also going to talk about ENSO, which is El Nino Southern Oscillation. I know that sounds really scientific, but basically El Nino, La Nina, where we are in that. There's an updated forecast and the impact that could have on the upcoming hurricane season. And joining me in a couple minutes will be meteorologist Brittany Van Voorhees, and we'll talk about that as well. She's also going to join us here in a minute talking about the local weather. But let's talk about that local weather. Here we are on a Thursday evening. If you've been outside, it is super hot and humid, and boy, this looks like Florida out there. We've got pop-up storms just about everywhere, but the first thing you notice, we do have a flash flood warning for Stanley County, and this is right around the Albemarle area. And I'm not surprised because this storm has just been sitting there since 4 o'clock when we started our earlier newscast. I'd love to tell you that these storms are moving, but honestly, this is a 1 hour loop, and you can kind of tell they're barely moving at all. In fact, they're probably just meandering, and what's happening is they're building up, collapsing, and new storms are forming on their outflow. So yeah, flash flood warning for Stanley County to our viewers out there until 8:45 this evening. Let me show you the rainfall estimates from Doppler radar. And again, most of this has fallen just since 4 o'clock. We'll zoom in on downtown Albemarle here. And again, especially the southwest side, about 3 inches of rain. And then heading west of town into the central part of Stanley County, about 2.5 inches of rain. So flash flood warning for Stanley County. A lot of rapid runoff here. You know, I jokingly call this the air you can wear when you go outside. You can feel it. But when it's super muggy like this, the atmosphere has a lot of moisture in it. And so when we get a storm, it tends to be very efficient at producing rainfall. So while that makes for very uncomfortable weather, it also makes for flash flood concerns. I'm going to widen the view out a little bit back to Charlotte. We had some storms trying to bubble up in Charlotte. I was particularly curious about these storms in South Charlotte because I got a 13-year-old daughter who's going to be trying to do a swim meet this evening, so we're going to watch the lightning out there. And I know there's a lot of swim meets tonight across Mecklenburg County, and lightning is always a big issue when you have outdoor events, especially pools, because as you know, when thunder roars, you go indoors. We don't want anybody outside during lightning, and you need to wait 30 minutes until the last lightning strike before you resume your outdoor activities. And again, that's the biggest concern with a lot of these storms, because they're all producing lightning. Now, what's really interesting is this cluster of storms coming up from the southeast. You can see them coming up through parts of Chesterfield County, Lancaster County, now making it to Chester County, even southeastern Union County, Anson County, Richmond County. Believe it or not, that is actually the sea breeze. The sea breeze made it here from the coast. Now, typically the sea breeze, whoops, my radar kind of went out there a second. The sea breeze typically only hangs out near the coastal plain, maybe the coastal areas. If you've been at the beach, you know what I'm talking about. But if you look carefully, you could see that band. I'll kind of draw a line along it here. I'm going to grab my trough here. So it's roughly right about here. I'll draw it there. That's the sea breeze, and it made it all the way to the Piedmont. Now, this happens occasionally in the summertime when you have strong southeasterly flow. That can tend to produce the sea breeze because it gets a kick. It kind of pushes it, and once it gets that push, you're getting that marine layer of air that comes all the way in from the coast. And it acts like a mini cool front, and oftentimes when we see that, it'll help kick off scattered showers and storms. So I think that's going to be something that will help trigger more showers and storms through the overnight hours. So this is the pattern that's actually causing our hazy, hot, humid, and scattered storm pattern, but also pushing the sea breeze pretty far inland. You can see that Bermuda High, or the subtropical ridge. It's off to the east of us. It's getting closer to the coast, and it's actually the clockwise flow around it is pushing in all this warm, humid air. And once it gets to the Carolinas, it helps kick off scattered showers and storms. And so if you like today's pattern, you're going to love the next couple of days, because it's a rinse and repeat kind of setup here. Before I bring Brittany in, I want to show you the future cast, and just to give you an idea, Brittany could speak a lot about Florida weather. I haven't spent a lot of time down there, but this is the kind of what you see: scattered showers and storms through the evening. Look, it's 2-3 o'clock in the morning, and we still have scattered storms around, and that's primarily because that sea breeze and all these other things that are coming in are kind of keep the storms going well into the overnight hours. So I would not be shocked to see storms even when you wake up tomorrow morning, before they kind of dissipate and things could reload. So what we've seen in this pattern is the first half, 2/3 of the day is pretty dry, and then we see the storms bubble up during the evening and the overnight hours. So here's the hourly forecast. We'll go into the overnight hours. And you could see the rain chances kind of bounce around between 20-30%, but also notice at 1 to 3 a.m. the rain chance goes back up to 50-40%. So pretty good chance we're going to see scattered showers through the overnight hours. So let's bring in meteorologist Brittany Van Voorhees. She joins us here in the Weather Impact studio tonight. And Brittany, Florida weather, we kind of jokingly say that, but if you spent any time in Florida, you know exactly what we're talking about.
Yeah, we always say, going to high school and college and then working in Florida, we always say that it's not whether or not there will be storms on a summer afternoon, it's where and when they're going to develop, because of the fact that we not only have the sea breeze on the western side and the Gulf, but also on the eastern side. And if you're lucky and you live in central Florida, like my parents near the Villages, or where I went to college in Gainesville, you get a sea breeze collision. And then eventually you get even worse storms, because they essentially collide, they rise, and they become even more active. So sea breeze is definitely a pain, but it causes a nice little breeze near the coast, which you talked about last week, I think, on social media. I saw talking about trying to remind people that there's no 0% chance of rain during the summer. So. Yeah,
and the crazy thing about this setup today is even the sky looked like a Florida sky today. We had these towering cumulus clouds. It just had that look to it, and it's so muggy out there. You just feel like it just takes a little bit of heating or push to get these updrafts going. And the radar loop is just impressive, because you just see storms kind of exploding all over the place right now. I'm looking at Union County right now, and you can see there over on the monitor. I mean, look at the explosion of storms here, and that's actually the sea breeze coming in from the southeast. So that's all it's taking, and around Pageland, and then up towards Monroe, and then Wadesboro on 74. those things are really building quickly. I mean, this is a 1 hour loop, and look how quickly those storms are bubbling up. Also seeing a lot more lightning strikes than we did earlier.
Yeah, it also looks like, too, because of the combination of the isolated storms that were not from the sea breeze combined with the two, it's like that training setup that we see a lot of times during the summer where they're not only forming on top of each other, but it's more storms moving into the same spots that just saw rain, which I think a little bit ago, right, we had some flood advisories issued, so I'm sure that does not help. I think also, too, with the tropical, it almost looked like the tropical sky where we had this cumulus plus like the high level cirrus.
Yes.
And it reminds you that you can still have a hot day even though there's clouds, because I think we got to 89 or 90 today.
89.
Yeah.
I mean, that's pretty crazy to get
clouds,
that warm.
So.
Yeah, the thing about this pattern, and you know, we joke about, you know, the air you can wear, but it really fits, because the second you go outside, it just envelops you. And the way you know it's super muggy is oftentimes, I always tell people, when you see the 7-day, look at those overnight lows. When you see them in the low to mid 70s, you know it's super humid, because the air temperature can never drop below the dew point. So that typically means the dew points are in the 70s. And at one point today, Sherrall, way down in Chesterfield County, had a dew point of 77. That is just disgusting. That is just gross air, because your body just can't cool itself in that scenario. And we've been pretty lucky. We have had humid weather, but we haven't had the really high heat yet, Brittany. That could change next week.
Yeah, so of course you need heat and humidity to have high heat index values.
Yes.
And unfortunately, it does look like we're going to get that next week. Now, I guess the trade-off is the fact that the Bermuda high looks to be a little bit stronger, which means maybe a little bit less storm activity, like 20 to 30%. But yeah, we have a big stretch next week of 90 plus, 91, 92, 93. Yeah. So we could run at our first 100-degree, if not higher, heat index value.
Yeah, so I put it up there for you. That's kind of the tentative forecast, but that will actually fluctuate as we get closer to next week.
Well, and I think, too, the thing with Charlotte, sometimes we're impacted by the urban heat island effect, but sometimes depending on the, you know, the wind flow, places like Chirac, some of those more rural communities will get even hotter than us.
Yeah.
So if we get like a really, really strong southeasterly or southwesterly wind, all of those kind of southern counties will not be feeling great.
Yeah, it also doesn't help down there. You know, you talked about the urban heat island, and that's, you know, that's a legitimate thing we think about here in Charlotte. All the concrete, steel, the lack of green space actually retains heat during the nighttime hours. But to our southeast, we have that real sandy soil, which during the day can make those areas super hot, like Rockingham, Fayetteville, down to Sherrall. They have a very quartz and sand-based soil. And so when it gets hot in the summer there, they get the kind of the same thing during the afternoons. It just heats up. There's not much moisture in the ground.
Yeah, thankfully, if there's no clouds, hopefully they can reflect some of that back. But of course, we don't have the same benefits because of the concrete. But also, I mean, this time of year, we know that it can cause flooding issues too, especially in a city like Charlotte that is constantly growing, and there's constant construction. You know, you have a heavy rain when you see like all the dirt, you know, like water start to push on the streets because there was some kind of construction and then we had heavy rain. So definitely something I think to monitor closely over the next few days.
So I just want to point out this one storm. I just zoomed in on it, Brittany. This storm here in southeastern part of Union County, it doesn't have a warning, but it does have a special weather statement. And it has up to 40-mile-per-hour winds and maybe half-inch diameter hail. So that cell in particular, and it's got a lot of cloud-to-ground lightning. And, you know, we talk a lot about that lightning jumps in these storms tells you that there's a vigorous updraft going on in that storm. So lightning in of itself is pretty dangerous, but one of the things we look at as meteorologists is when we see a jump in lightning, we know that storm is getting stronger because the updraft's very vigorous at the very least.
Ooh. I mean, it feels like summer. Actually, Nick and I were talking about this earlier on Impact News, which of course, you know, is in the same center. But we're also in that time of year where people, you know, wanting to exercise, things like that outside, there's really no good time. I know you joke about that sometimes during the summer of working till midnight, but still trying to get up early so you can get your run in. But
I'm crazy. I run in the middle of the day, and people think it's nuts. And I just do it because that's when we train for soccer. I just got used to it. But I tell you, the hardest part about doing that is like, even after you get out of the shower, like an hour and a half later, you're like still sweating because your body temperature is so hot. You're like, I just took a shower, and you start sweating again. It just takes forever to cool down.
Yeah, I think that's like the air you can wear too. It's like when you're running, it's like you're like zipping like the humidity and trying to like swim through it. So just something for people to keep in mind, especially if they are, even if it's early. We're kind of in that time of year where you have to stay hydrated and take all those precautions no matter what time it is.
And we'll hear about it like it's summer, it's supposed to be hot and humid. But here's the thing, the first little heat wave of the year, your body needs to acclimate to this. Your body isn't quite ready for it. So it can catch you off guard. Not even exercise, just working in the yard. I've done this many times. So I don't drink enough water sometimes, and you're out, mowing the lawn or whatever, and I come in and I just want to like pound the Gatorade because you're just so dehydrated. So I know it sounds silly. It seems like we're being like your mom, but it's like it really need to drink. The time to drink is not when you're thirsty. It's before you get thirsty. If you get thirsty, it might be too late. You've probably already missed your chance to hydrate. And this is a time of year where kids are at summer camps. My daughter right now is in a soccer camp, and that's all I preach to her all the time is 2 things of water. You drink all the time because it'll catch up to you when you're not paying attention. So heat is very dangerous, folks. I know everybody lives in the South and they think, hey, they're immune to it. But as we know as meteorologists, heat is the #1 killer now in weather. It's not tornadoes, it's not hurricanes, it's heat. People are dying from heat all the time.
Yeah, and I know that I did a climate IQ on this, what was it, last summer or the summer before, but it's not even just the fact that it is hot, but it's like heat, people can't see it. Like you can see a storm, you can see a tornado, you can see that risk, but if they can't see the risk, I mean, I guess you can on a really hot day where like it almost looks hazy, but not being able to see the risk from heat or from cold, things like that, it's like not visually there, so people like almost forget that it's there. I know that's another reason too why most doctors, fitness professionals, whatever, will recommend like drinking water right before you get up in the morning, so you're kind of pre-hydrating your body for no matter what the day has. So 100 degrees for feels like temperature isn't necessarily like to that heat advisory criteria, but I think you make a good point that people won't be used to it just because it's been so long. And we kind of had a late first 90 degree day of the year too. So even though March and April were really warm, May was not. It was cool and wet.
Yeah, we got cool in May. And so, I feel like every year we kind of preach this, and I know there's always pushback, like it's always hot. We get that, but we still have people who unfortunately will pass away or have heat stroke or end up in the hospital because they didn't take it seriously enough. Real cool feature showing up on the radar right now. Got I don't know if that's the actual sea breeze, but we've got outflow boundaries. And we're going to have a little collision here.
Ooh, look at that.
So what we're looking at, so Brittany and I are geeking out about this. Lily, our intern, is in here as well. She's probably geeking out too about this because when you're a meteorologist and you see this on the radar, it's kind of cool. So those little green lines that you see moving out from these storms here, this line here and this line here, that's that rush of cool air Brittany was talking about that you often feel from storms. So storms are producing cool air, they're rushing out. And they produce these outflow boundaries. And the outflow boundary can show up on radar for a couple reasons. One, there could be a little bit of cloud cover, but there could be bugs, dust, other biologicals, we call them, being pushed with that. And so they show up on the radar. So what we're going to watch is when these two collide, they will force air up into the sky. So between Lake Wylie and maybe down to Interstate 26, we could have a collision of these outflow boundaries. And that could really spur maybe a cluster of storms because that's an area in Chester and York County that has not been impacted by storms yet. So there's tons of storm fuel down there for those that keep going. So that's something to watch, and it's just showing up so crystal clear on the radar.
I know, you love that. It's just very cool meteorologically. Well, the problem too is, the rise of air, but then because the fronts are essentially sitting there, that causes kind of even more of a training issue because they don't really have anywhere to go.
So I'm gonna turn off the flash flood. We know the flash flood warning's up. I'm gonna move that, but flash flood warning there. So look at all those outflow boundaries. And that's a real indication of the type of storms we have today. When they're pushing out outflow boundaries, there's not much air movement because what's happening, the storm is building, it's collapsing, it's pushing out outflow. And that's what you see on the radar. The storms kind of develop, then fall apart, and new storms form on the outflow from the old storm. That's your typical summer pattern when there's not a lot of steering currents and the storms just kind of explode. Actually, if you look carefully there in Union or Chester County, you can actually see the outflow boundary actually caused this storm to form near Richburg, and it looks like it formed this other one near 77 in Great Falls. So, that's a pretty cool looking view of outflow boundary. In fact, I think we have a graphic that shows.
Yeah, you just don't really see those that often. Here this far inland in the Carolinas. I mean, yes, in the summer, but to see such a good outflow.
Yeah.
Versus like Florida, it's like every other afternoon.
I'm going to bring up an outflow graphic here in a second that kind of shows you how this works. It's the great thing about this show in real time. I can pull it up for you. So this is what we're talking about. So you'll see this graphic come up. When you have a thunderstorm like that, it pushes out this cool pool of air, and it's rain-cooled air. Some of it's actually cold air coming from the mid and upper levels of the atmosphere because remember, everything that goes up must come down. So when these storms build up, everything that goes up into the atmosphere has to come down. And that cold pull becomes like a mini cold front. You actually could feel that rush of cool air. It's called a gust front. And those can be dangerous too, by the way, because oftentimes in the summer, people are only tracking where the rain is. And if you have a tent or you have a party going on and you're not tracking where that gust front is, that can be the thing that blows over the stuff at your party or yard sale. I know last weekend for Taste of Charlotte, we saw a gust front coming in, and that was a big concern for people in Uptown because they're like, hey, the rain's this far away. Yeah, but the gust front was like 5 to 10 minutes ahead of the rain. And in Uptown, while it wasn't severe, when you get wind coming down through those streets in Uptown and they have all those temporary tents for Taste of Charlotte, those things become sails and they just go flying everywhere.
And even no matter what's going on in Uptown, it could just be a regular Thursday afternoon. And it's like the wind is going to get so much stronger just because it gets stuck through those buildings. So yes, it's like that time that you're like, okay, nail down those tents, try to make sure they don't. We also, and obviously same thing, you know, friends, family members love to ask that too, but like it can cause big issues for like people with weddings, tents, and I think that's a big thing too on the weekends during the summer because they're so concerned about, I mean, we can be under the tent if the cold front comes and it's like, well, only if the tent doesn't get blown.
Yeah, and remember, I've done a ton of outdoor events, outdoor support, and severe thunderstorms are only issued for 58 mile per hour winds, but most of those tents, those temporary structures, are only rated to 35 miles per hour.
Wow.
So there will be no severe thunderstorm warning, and you could have a lot of damage from one of these, like farmers markets or festivals or, you know, baseball games on the weekend where everyone puts the pop-ups up to shade themselves from the sun. Those could be dangerous. So before we end the show now, we only have about 10 minutes left. I wanted to talk about something that happened today. It's kind of a big deal, and I'm going to talk a little bit about it. We can't show the graphic because for some reason our laptop isn't working, but we'll show you what we're talking about here in a minute. But El Nino, La Nina. We talk a lot about this in weather, and today was an update to what we call the ENSO forecast. The ENSO forecast, just so you know, it stands for El Nino Southern Oscillation. It's basically the climate pattern in the Pacific that causes abnormally warm or cool temperatures in the equatorial eastern Pacific. And that has huge impacts on our hurricane season. And so what that means, the ENSO phases have pretty dramatic effects on our winter weather, but here's what they do to our hurricane season. La Nina, which is cooler than average water in the equatorial Pacific, creates warmer Atlantic water, which we're seeing, especially in the Caribbean and the Gulf, less wind shear, and it creates a lot more conditions favorable for storms. La Nada, which is the neutral phase, which is probably the redheaded stepchild of the ENSO phases, because nobody ever talks about it, but there's a phase in between El Nino and La Nina, and La Nada actually can be pretty problematic. And El Nino is actually kind of what you want to see for hurricane season, honestly, because cooler water, more wind shear. And Brittany, when we were going into our forecast in our hurricane special, the forecast was for a La Nada, or neutral phase. So I know you read the discussion, I read it briefly. There was a little bit of an update today from NOAA on what they expect during the hurricane season.
It was basically a higher chance that we were going to stay in La Nada for the majority of hurricane season, which is not a necessarily bad thing, but it's also not necessarily a good thing. But it's funny because, well, I guess not funny, but you know, and so neutral. So the La Nada pattern, like La Nada, as you know, it's like more of like a slang weather term that we kind of made it. It's not even like, but it's because we needed something to discuss that neutral pattern, because while La Nina and El Nino can tell you more favorable or less favorable, La Nada is like the middle child who's like, well, I'm not causing worse or better conditions. And so that doesn't mean, you know, we say all the time that it only takes one storm to make a bad season, and you can certainly have really bad hurricanes in an El Nino, which is lesser storms, or weaker storms during the La Nina. But it's almost like that uncertainty that kind of, I think, makes people weary. And some of the worst storms have happened during La Nada. You know, 2 seasons we always talk about, 1992 when Hurricane Andrew made landfall in Miami. There was only 7 storms the whole season, but Category 5.
Yeah. So we put up
so.
the graphic here. Here's the top 10 most storms in the Atlantic since 1851, and we color-coded them based on what ENSO phase they were in. So you could see the top 3 seasons were La Nina. So La Nina is not bad, but here's the caveat. We told you El Nino is not a big deal, right? Normally it's good. Well, in 2023, we had 20 storms. Just goes to show you this isn't a foolproof forecasting method. But 1933, that was before we had data. 19 back in 2012. That was a neutral phase, but you notice a lot of green on the top 10, which means La Nina is typically what you don't want to see. And while, yes, NOAA says we're probably going to see a neutral or La Nada, the air in the forecast models is towards the La Nina side.
Yeah, it's much, much, much warmer.
Yeah, so if there's a bust or like a miss in the forecast, it's probably going to be for a La Nina, not an El Nino. So I think that's something to keep in mind. And just to give you an update on the forecast, because I failed to mention this, I feel like I let you guys down. We didn't talk about this.
You did not let us down.
Colorado State, Phil Kalsbaugh updated his forecast. I believe it was on the 11th, which was yesterday. I had to look at my watch. And here's the good news. I didn't have to change the graphic because he didn't change his forecast. 17 named storms, 9 hurricanes, 4 major hurricanes. So I think more his update was an updated forecast discussion talking about some of the things that may be changing, but the numbers overall did not change, Brittany. And anything you look at, it all looks above average.
Yeah, and you made a good point too when we were talking just before starting here, is that just because we're trending toward about 82% of a La Nina now, that's June through August.
Yeah.
And 90% roughly of storms in the Atlantic Basin happen post August 1st. And so there is about a 50-50 shot that past August, September, October, we could trend a little bit more toward the La Nina. So
yeah,
there's basically no chance that we're going to have a technically, lesser than normal hurricane season, obviously, unless it's a huge bust. But that trend is, 82% now. But that doesn't mean that by the end of hurricane season that we wouldn't be trending more toward La Nina, because, hurricane season's 6 months.
Yep.
And it's, 87% after August 1st. But I think that we've talked about this before, Brad, and I don't know what the official number is, but most of the bad storms in the Carolinas, September, October.
Yeah, so what Brittany's alluding to is like the La Nina forecast is only through August. So that's this part of the season. And as you can see from statistics, 87%, roughly almost 90% of all storms occur from August 1st to the end of the season. So there's a chance late in the season that the pattern could flip to a La Nina, which could be bad news because, as we just saw with the previous graphics, La Nina seasons tend to produce the most storms, some of the biggest storms. And if that happens during the peak of the hurricane season, that's like a double whammy where you get the peak of the season already and you have a climate teleconnection that actually would create more storms. The one thing we don't know, and I think this is the biggest part about preseason forecasting, we still don't know the predominant steering currents. Mm-hmm. And even if we could get an idea, like today I showed you Bermuda High where it is now, early in the season almost doesn't matter. Where does it really set up during that peak season when we're in August, September, October? I will say that, Colorado State, they're hinting at more of a Gulf Coast, Florida type of season versus East Coast, meaning the Bermuda High could be closer to us. And I know people in the Carolinas immediately go, great, fewer storms. The problem is...
Big, deep breath.
Yeah. For the Western Carolinas, our biggest storms come in from the Gulf Coast. So I could think of every flash flood, tornado outbreak from a tropical system. It didn't come from a storm coming from our coast. It came from the Florida Panhandle, the Alabama Gulf Coast, sometimes the Louisiana Gulf Coast, and puts us on the east side or the dirty side of the storm, which is a really cool term we like to say. But Brittany, kind of explain what the dirty side of the storm means.
Well, it's essentially the front. We always say you hear northeast quadrant, right front quadrant. Essentially, yes, if you were looking at a piece of paper, north, south, east, west, where they're normally oriented, it would be in the northeastern side. Now, of course, that depends on the angle of approach. If a storm's directly making a northerly turn, that's different, of course, in northeast. And it's, but regardless, if those storms are making landfall somewhere along the Gulf Coast, so pretty much from the Big Bend of Florida over toward Louisiana, we're either on the east side, the northeast side, either way, dirty side.
Yeah.
Normally, we have your strongest wind there. And also because of the drag of a tropical system's outer bands, essentially as it moves over land, you also get more spin, typically more wind shear, which allows for more tornadoes. And last year, some of the strongest tropical tornadoes that had ever happened in Florida happened in like the West Palm area.
Yeah.
So it does seem like with this, there's not a lot of data since like satellite era was only in the 60s. And of course, we haven't had as many major hurricanes in Category 4s and 5s as we have the last few years and last decade or two. But there's more data that's starting to come in that the stronger, of course, the storm, the worse those tropical tornadoes can be.
Yeah.
In fact, I remember my second week here, 2021 August, Greenville-Spartanburg, our local
Yeah.
forecast office, issued like the most tornado warnings they'd ever issued in one day for our area. And
That
it
was
was
Fred.
because of Tropical Depression Fred.
Yeah.
So also goes to show you that just because it's a depression does not mean that.
I remember that day.
Yeah.
36 tornado warnings in a single day. And that was from a storm that came up from the Panhandle.
Mm-hmm.
I think of Ivan. I think of Francis,
Yeah.
Faye,
You guys had impacts from
Gustav.
Michael too in 2018.
Yeah, I mean, pretty much. Michael,
Yeah.
Category 5 storm, makes landfall in Florida, caused widespread power outages here. Almost, I think, 2 million people lost power because the winds were so strong up here. So that's just something to think about as we get into the hurricane season. I know there's a lot of focus on the Carolina coast. And if for folks watching out there, you need to pay attention. And if you have beach property, yes. But here, the Gulf is a big part of that as well. So we're going to talk more about this over the next couple of weeks. But don't go anywhere. Coming up in 2 minutes, Colin will have more with Impact News.